Okay, I'd like to welcome everybody to the September 9th, 2015 City of Brentwood Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. If you'll please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Roll call, please.
John Ritter,
Here.
Rebecca Jacobs,
Here.
Clint Lewis,
Here.
John Nuremberger is here, Sherry Bilderbeck,
Here.
Michael Daming,
Here.
David Divit,
Here.
Jennifer Hansen,
Here.
Karen Smith,
Here.
Hart Nelson.
Here.
We have a quorum, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Nuremberger. Has everyone had an opportunity to review the August 12th, 2015 meeting minutes? Are there any changes to said minutes? Seeing none, they'll stand as submitted by acclamation. We have one item tonight under old business, and that is a comprehensive plan update. Mr. Wise, can you bring the commission up to speed as to where we've been and where we are currently on this?
Sure. So, at the beginning of 2015, the city had a project to review our existing comprehensive plan, go through it, talk with some folks in the area, talk with the Planning and Zoning Commission, and come up with basically a recommendation for what they thought we should do. Was the plan sufficient as it stood? Did it need some minor updates? Did it need to be rewritten altogether? So we went through that process over a 2 to 3 month period and ended up with a set of recommendations from the consultant for areas where the comprehensive plan needed to be updated. Some of the key features of that, they thought that the plan needed to be reorganized and refocused so that it was more centered towards residents and businesses and the people within the community that may look to the plan for guidance. And that also included integration of more graphic elements into the plan to supplement some of the text that's in there, give graphics that illustrate exactly what the city is looking for in particular circumstances. In addition, one of the larger recommendations was the creation of sub-area analysis. And those 3 areas looked at the Manchester Road corridor, the Brentwood Boulevard corridor, and Strassner within the Hanley Industrial Court area, and really getting into more detail on those 3 areas, moving down into more of a what I would call an area-specific plan or a detailed plan for those corridors. There were also 3 kind of additional items that the consultant had identified. One of them was a detailed economic development component, a review of the existing development codes in light of the update that would be completed to make sure that the city's regulations were actually encouraging and allowing the types of development the city would like to see, as opposed to preventing development that we would like to see. And then a final element of creation of residential design guidelines. Following that project, the Planning and Zoning Commission met. Staff prepared an RFP at the direction of the Planning and Zoning Commission to basically solicit proposals to incorporate the ideas that were recommended by the consultants. We presented that RFP in, I believe it was May of this year, and subsequently the RFP was issued. After the RFP was issued, we received 3 submittals. The prime consultants for the submittals were the I-5 Group, House of Levine and Associates, and H3 Studio. So we typically our standard process is we do an initial evaluation and interview 3 to 5 firms. Since we only had 3 submit, we elected to just go ahead and interview all 3 of the firms that submitted proposals on the project. If you look at the first page of the staff report, it shows the breakdown of the cost. I broke it down to the bid and the bid with the alternates. So the bid was the general update to the plan with the sub-area analysis. The alternates were the economic development portion, the residential design guidelines, and the addition of the, I forgot the last one, I'm sorry.
Code review.
Thank you, the code review. In talking with several of the consultants, they indicated that there was some pretty significant savings of cost if you were to include those alternates with the general update, primarily because of the amount of data collection that's done as part of the planning. The plan update could then be utilized within the economic development component, or that public engagement could kind of capture both of those at the same time. So we interviewed the three companies. The total for the I-5 group, the proposal with the bid alternates was $95,000. House of Levine was $130,000, and H3 Studio was $157,170. When we interviewed the firms, we used the criteria that was laid out in the RFP as well as the city code. And staff's recommendation after the interviews was to select House of Levine and Associates, even though they were not the lowest bid. Some of the reasons that we were particularly impressed, the enthusiasm for public engagement, their ideas of using traditional and web-based applications for community engagement. They also had ideas that they've used. For example, they have a current project. They're doing the same project in University City, and what they've done is they've created public engagement toolkits where they'll train either P&Z members or staff members, and they'll give them literally a little toolkit for them to go conduct meetings out in the community themselves. The other item that really set them apart from, in particular, the low bid was their wealth of experience in comprehensive planning directly. The I-5 group is they were a very good qualified firm, but it was staff's opinion that House of Levine's experience in dealing with comprehensive plans justified the additional expenditure, particularly with a focus on the public engagement portion of it. So on page 2 of the staff report, there's a summary of a 7-step approach that House of Levine has proposed for the project. They have an initial project initiation / kickoff portion of it, where they would meet with various city officials, the Planning and Zoning Commission, for example, staff members, and other key city people that could help give them some initial feedback and set the project in motion. The second step, it's a community outreach, again, both traditional and web-based. The community outreach is shown as kind of the second step, however, it extends kind of throughout the process. It's not a one-time type of a deal. It goes throughout the entire process. The third portion was an existing conditions analysis. The work that they had previously done on the initial review of the plan will certainly be beneficial in them preparing that. And then working with the city to develop a community vision, developing the goals for the plans and establishing the objectives for it, development of the sub-area plans, development of the community-wide plans and policies, and then finally the draft and final plan presentations and open houses. Staff was of the opinion that the approach that they laid out was consistent with what the city was looking for. It's consistent with best practices within the profession, and our recommendation is to move forward with a plan update with House of Levine Associates.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Wise. So primarily for the new commissioners, I do just want to review what we're considering tonight and why it's so important. The comprehensive plan is a creature of statute. Missouri statutes speak to a comprehensive plan and actually specifically gives the Planning and Zoning Commission of Missouri municipalities the exclusive ability to enact the comprehensive plan. It's the key planning document that will govern how this, it's not binding necessarily, although there are references throughout the code to ensuring that submittals are consistent with the comprehensive plan. But it is the key planning document that the city, both this commission and the Board of Aldermen, will look to and should look to when it's considering applications for the next 5 to 10 years. The current comprehensive plan that governs this city was enacted in 2006. And what we're doing tonight is selecting who's going to be drafting the new comprehensive plan, and it's so important, I'd say primarily because there's been so much criticism of the 2006 plan. Criticism of how it was organized, criticism with how poorly, frankly, in the opinions of some of the experts we've talked to, how poorly the implementation section was drafted, and how inadequate it was to providing boards such as this and the Board of Aldermen with specific ideas on how to implement some of the ideas that are in that comprehensive plan. So it's a very important step. We do appreciate everything that staff has done in interviewing these proposals. One question I have is, why do we only have 3 submissions? I'm sure we sent this RFP out all over the community.
It was advertised locally. We have our code requirements that it's published in the paper, goes on our website. We publish it in the local government briefings put out by East West Gateway, and then it was put on the American Planning Association, the national chapter's website as well. So,
Any ideas why there were only 3 proposals?
no. I had several other calls aside from that. Firms that, quite frankly, I thought a couple of them would have submitted, but they elected not to, but I'm not sure why.
And I believe in your interviews, you determined that the I-5 group, the low bidder, had not done one of these comprehensive plans before?
In their qualifications, most of their comprehensive planning, if not all of it, experience that they show is actually their sub-consultants that they're proposing to use on the project. So the prime consultant, being the I-5 group, did not include the comprehensive plan experience.
What distinguished, and I understand that certainly distinguishes Halcyon Levine from I-5, what distinguished Halcyon Levine from H3?
We were impressed with both firms, so that one was particularly price motivated.
And the price distinction really is from the alternates.
Correct.
Any idea why they were 100% higher on the alternates than the other 2 proposals?
I have no idea why.
Okay. All right, open it up to questions from commissioners. All right, Ms. Bilderbeck?
I like the recommendation. I think it sounds great. I think it sounds like exactly what we had asked for. Yeah, so I don't have any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Nuremberger?
How minutes did we spend with House Levine last time? The last time?
14,000.
What's that?
14,000.
So it's not included in this price. That was separate.
Correct.
Okay.
And quite frankly, that's probably part of the difference in the price between H3 and House of Levine, is House of Levine's already done
part of the
some
work.
of the legwork.
Yeah. That's
And
all.
just to follow up, how much did we spend, if you know, on the 2006 plan?
I'm not sure of that number off the top of my head.
Mr. Lewis?
A couple of things. The 130,000, is that from a start? I thought originally we were thinking about doing an update to our plan, but this pricing, is this starting from scratch?
Well, I mean, it'll use the existing plan as a starting point, but it will be a drastically different plan at the end of the day.
And then, as far as the 130,000, do we have to ask, is this in a budget for this year or next year, or do we have to go ask for that? Or?
So in the budget for FY15, so we run calendar year, we have 130,000 budgeted. Now, we already spent 14,000 of that, so basically there's $116,000 budgeted within the Planning and Development Department for this update. There are some savings elsewhere within the department's budget, and with it being cheaper to do the alternates at the same time as the plan update. It's staff's recommendation to use savings from elsewhere within my department's budget to cover that additional funds to match so that we can get the project done.
Good enough.
So, Mr. Wise, so is tonight's decision by this commission a recommendation, or is it the final decision?
It'll be a recommendation ultimately. So if the Planning and Zoning Commission were to accept staff's recommendation, we would forward it on to the Board of Aldermen, who would enter into a contract with House Levine for the project.
What, Ms. Smith?
Maybe just a little bit of follow-up from Clint. So the city or planning and zoning where that statute lies, so like every 10 years, are we supposed to do like a comprehensive plan, and will this meet that? In looking at the comprehensive plan review report, there are a lot of areas in here that are not part of what we asked them to bid on. And so we're going to be doing some of what they highlighted in their report, but not all of it. So do we feel that this would meet the statute?
Their proposal would implement all of the items that they called out in their initial review.
Okay. All right.
So as far as a statute for how often a plan has to be updated, there is nothing in Missouri state statutes that dictates when communities have to update their plan. Some do it more often, some go decades without.
Right. And, this is me being a newbie here, but so like they talk about public safety, but that wasn't necessarily one of their recommendations. Is that not something that we would typically have in a comprehensive plan unless it deals with like a public safety issue with something that we're doing with the built environment?
Well, it would deal with public safety in the sense of, public safety is part of how your community feels and your community identity and protecting those aspects. Now, we're not going to get into talking about how the police department is run or how the fire department is run. That would be outside of the scope of this.
Okay, all right. And that's typical for comprehensive plans?
Absolutely.
Okay, all right. And then my next question is, so we've got a lot of the 7-step process, and I think implementation was sort of an area that generally we feel was lacking in the last plan. And we've got something in there, strategic plan and implementation strategy. Like, do we understand kind of what their implementation plan or their strategy looks like, or can they share an example with us? So we can, because there's a lot of different ways you can talk about implementation. It can be like at a high level, it could be some, high-level bullets, or it can be an actual, step plan that they sit down with us and kind of work through. Like, as a city, we'd like to prioritize these things first and have a timeline for when we might implement them.
I think the answer to that is, I think from a firm's perspective, they could do either of those, that it's somewhat at the direction of the city. From the initial review process, from what we've heard from this commission, from the public, and from the board, I think there was definitely a desire, at least to some extent on some of these elements, to get some more concrete, within the next, X number of years, these are the types of projects, these are the types of code revisions, these are whatever it may be that the city should do to move towards fulfilling this goal. And that those would be ranked in some sort of a priority.
Okay. I just want to make sure we have that clearly somehow communicated. I don't know if that's in the document itself or how we do that, but I think it should be communicated, like what our expectations are for the outcome.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Demmett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Justin, these three entities, Housel Levine, are they from Chicago?
They are out of the Chicago area.
What about the other two?
The other two are both local.
Do any of them, I think you said Housel Levine is doing something for University City right now, is that right?
Correct. I think they're doing an economic development plan for the city of Wildwood right now. I'm not sure if they're currently working or if they just finished up with Sunset Hills. But I know they have several projects in the area.
Have they done any comp plans for any other municipalities in St. Louis?
They've done University City and Sunset Hills.
Okay.
And I think that there's a third one that they just were awarded, but
And I'm assuming I-5 hasn't done any since,
not that I'm aware of.
all right. And H3, have they done any in St. Louis, do you recall?
I believe they are currently, I think they were just awarded the plan or an update in Creve Coeur, so I know that they have done work within the St. Louis market.
And finally, these bids, are these firm numbers? Is this a flat fee, or is this something that?
This is a firm number. Anything, this is a do not exceed amount. Anything that would exceed this amount basically would be a change to the contract and would have to be formally approved.
So if it turns out we have to have additional meetings,
Yeah.
there's no
And-
cost to overrun or anything like that?
And this was one of the elements about House of Levine that was particularly impressive from my point of view. They had made mention that, if working with the city and, we're trying to get a meeting set up and we have 2 people show up for a meeting, that's not a public meeting. That they will, get it right and get the meetings done and get participation and engagement in the community. And that would not be an overrun on the cost.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Hanson?
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wise, I'm pleased with the approach and the proposal set out by House of Levine. I liked working with them very much the first time around, and I liked the idea of familiarity. That said, even though we didn't choose I-5, or you're not recommending rather I-5 or H3, I'm curious to know if either of those proposals included an approach that you think would be valuable to us, even though we didn't choose them, or something that was better in either of those proposal packets that we could utilize with House of Levine.
I really don't. I mean, quite frankly, all 3 firms are good firms. I don't mean it to come off that I'm in any way insinuating that they're not qualified or good firms.
Yeah, I didn't get that sense.
I know, just for the record, I think that they're all good. I think House of Levine's approach is a solid approach, and it's tested, and that it's a good approach.
Last question I had, do we know who from House of Levine will staff the project? Will it be the 2 gentlemen who are here?
It'll be a kind of a rotation of folks as they go through the project.
Okay.
So the gentlemen that were here last time, so there was a gentleman, Drew Awesome. He'll kind of handle a lot of the day-to-day type of work. Devin Levine was here. He's one of the associates with the firm. He gets involved. He handles a lot of the graphics and a lot of the technical information. John Housel, who was present at the interview, he handles a lot of the community engagement portion of it. They have a separate person so within their firm, they have specialties. So I would expect that Drew would be the point person on the day-to-day basis, but that at any point in the process, they would filter in with other members of their team.
And I lied. What about Nelson Nygaard Consulting Associates as a sub-consultant for the transportation planning? As part of that, do you ever interview the subs, or do you just get a feel from?
Rarely.
Okay. What do you know about them, if anything?
They're a fantastic consulting firm in the transportation planning. I think from our perspective, a lot of traffic consultants, transportation consultants are very heavy on traffic. And I think one of the things that's particularly impressive about Nelson Nygaard is their very balanced approach to cars, to pedestrians, bicyclists, to transit, and how when you have a defined space, all of those competing interests work together to merge into a single network effectively. And I think that they understand that relationship better than most.
Thank you.
Mr. Nelson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wise, if I could, just something that you had mentioned there and dig into number 2 on the 7-step approach. Part of the community outreach, I like the fact that it's traditional and web-based. Is that also, we're talking about self-selecting, or is it going to be more of a survey? One of the things you'd mentioned is 2 people does not make a public meeting, which I appreciate. Do you have any more information on what the plan is for that community
It'll
outreach?
be again, it'll kind of change as the process goes on. So for instance, when we move into the sub-area analysis, we'll definitely have a more targeted approach to our outreach that will really focus in on, one, we'll keep the community at large engaged in that, but we'll really focus on getting those property owners along those corridors directly into it. At the beginning, when we're focusing on, just larger community outreach, we don't have it defined at this point, but there's different approaches that we can look at. I think we'll have to figure out exactly what the best approach is for Brentwood so that we can get engagement. Some of the ideas that they had mentioned were a lot of times you can go to schools after hours. If you can work with the school district to send stuff home with kids, I know a lot of school districts don't like that. But if we could use them or other, the library, or tap the parks department and, into their resources and move our meetings around so that we're, yes, we're a small community, but if you move it out of City Hall, it's a little less intimidating. Sometimes providing food gets a lot of people out. So we'll explore all of those.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Demmett?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jennifer had me think of something. On NIGAR, do they do the same thing that CBB does?
They're similar companies. I would say Nelson Nygaard is a little bit more planning focused, while CBB is a little bit more engineering focused.
Okay, so they aren't necessarily one.
No, I mean, from larger public view, they're probably seen as competing firms. But I think Nelson Nygaard is a little bit more on the planning end.
And I don't know if this is really something for us to be concerned about, my next question, but I'll ask it anyway. Have you seen the proposed contract with Housel and Levine?
Well, it's not entirely done at this point.
No, I understand that, but I guess what I'm getting to is, I don't know how these things work. Do we pay the $130,000 if the Board of Aldermen agrees to do this? Do they pay the $130 up front? Is it in incremental payments? Is there some type of insurance that this thing gets done in a 10, 11-month period? Are there drop dead dates in the contract? Anything that we can do to make sure this isn't dragged out, because we're 10th year into this now.
Typically, they're done on a time and materials basis, which would lend itself to the exact problem that you're kind of pointing out. The benefit to the city in that is, if you get, we're not paying, monthly installments on the bill, but they're only doing small portions of work. We're paying for work as they complete the work. But I think, and if we use their previous work with the city as an example, I think they were, 2 weeks faster on that relatively short process than they had, and they have a dedication to keeping the schedule.
Well, then I'm a little confused on is it time and material, or is it a flat fee?
It's a not to exceed. So it's time and materials not to exceed the 130.
So are they billing then per hour? Is it an hourly rate?
Right.
And what is their hourly rate?
It depends on who's working on it.
What's the range?
Oh, you're anywhere from $50 for an hour for some of the regular draftsmen, or to probably 150, 160 an hour for some of the principals.
So there is a situation where they could max it out. They could put enough hours into that. Let's assume $200 an hour, 500 hours. At that point, they've gone through the $100,000. They would say, we're not putting any more work into this?
Well, they still have a contract that, they've said that they were going to complete these tasks on these items. And if they can't justify, if there's no action taken by the city to change their costs, they need to stick with that budget. So the contract's still in place at that point. So just because we sign a contract with them for $130,000, and then they go and have their highest paid employee do a bunch of work, and they only get through steps 1 through 3, and they say they're out of money, they're still obligated to complete the project.
Okay.
And in addition, I don't know if it would be monthly or bi-weekly, essentially, we track completion through the project versus completion through the budget, to keep an eye and make sure that the money we're spending is matching our progress through the project.
And that's something you would be monitoring?
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Smith?
So I'm backing up on your questions, Dave. Would it be possible for like each phase of this to get what their estimated cost is for that phase so that we can monitor as it goes through? Is that
Well-
something that typically is done? I would
That's
hope.
typically a staff function. I mean, it becomes a very cumbersome project to have, 11 P and Z members and 9 Board of Aldermen, and
Not us, maybe, it's
Yeah.
okay if it resides with you, but like, so as part of this bid, are they gonna break down how that 130 is gonna be used within each one of these phases? And so as we work through this, like, do they do it, so like typically we'll do like an upfront timeline that says, this, we wanted to accomplish these tasks in this time frame,
Right.
this cost, and, kind of go through that, and then that way you can manage it and you can start seeing, like, if
Right.
we need additional community outreach to achieve the goals that we want out of that second step, and then to Dave's point, they would run out of money, or we get to $100,000 by the time we get to step 3, and they're still committed to finishing all of this, would we still get a good quality product because we're not able to do everything in
Right.
each one of these other steps?
yes, we track that, absolutely.
So you get that as part of the contract?
Yeah.
Okay. Can but you don't want us to see that?
Well, I don't care if you.
I mean, I don't need to
see
monitor it, but.
Right, right. I
just-
just, I don't have a problem sharing that information,
Mm-hmm.
by any means.
Okay, thanks, thank you.
Ms. Hanson?
Thank you. Mr. Weiss, just so that I'm clear, and just maybe so that the board, the commissioners are clear, a not to exceed means that they're doing the job regardless of how well or how poorly they do the job. It gets done not to exceed 130,000. So if they spend all the resources on step 1, they're still obligated to complete steps 2 through 7 at their own cost. I mean, it's like being a lawyer, unfortunately. You think you're gonna, if you charge somebody a flat fee and it turns out you've got to go to court 20 times on the matter, you learn next time not to do that. So that's
Right.
what we're dealing with, right?
Correct.
Is anybody vetting the contract? Is it just internal with staff, or does this go out to council?
Well,
I mean,
it'll-
like, once it's drafted?
Oh, our
you
city
do a
attorney will
review?
absolutely review it,
Okay,
absolutely.
okay, that's all I had. Thank you.
Mr. Nuremberger?
I was just curious what your expected timeline is for implementation and finished product.
Around 10 to 12 months, 9 to 12 months, somewhere in that range.
So we're talking about being, if we get it approved this month or next month, you're talking about maybe being official end of 2016, something like being done in the year 2016.
Correct. And one of the comments that was made by the consultant was that actually speeding up the process, when you speed up the process, effectively what you do is you reduce the community input portion of it. That if you condense that down, they find that less people get involved. And so it's striking a balance of keeping the process condensed enough that you can keep people actively engaged throughout the process and they understand that it's moving, but also not making it in such a short time frame that people say, well, I don't want to go to another meeting with Brentwood, at City Hall. So it's a balance between those two, and they say around 10 months is kind of the sweet spot in their opinion.
Will they be giving updates to us on a monthly basis, or will that come from you, or?
Well, in the context, it'll probably come from me, but I think that you all will be, particularly in some of
Right.
the earlier stages, you guys will be pretty actively aware of what's going on.
That's all I had, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Smith?
So, thank you. So what would go, and again, this isn't being new and trying to understand the process, what would actually go forward to the board? Would they get something like this, or would we have a contract that goes forward?
They'll have a formal contract that'll go
Okay.
forward.
And so in that contract, would there be a little bit more detail? I mean, I just would think it would be helpful for them to
Sure.
understand how the dollars would be distributed amongst the different phases and the
We
timeline.
can put it into that without a problem.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, would any member of the audience like to address the commission on this proposal? Sir, please step up to the mic and introduce yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Denton. I appreciate that you solicit the public contact. This board must be getting brighter because you all brought up things that I had made notes on. I'm equally disappointed that we only had 3 applicants. With a project this large, one would think perhaps that there would be more interest. I guess, must be really good days right now for these planning groups. I didn't consider that. I got a teaching certificate. Oh, wow. And Mr. Dimmitt brought up where were these people based. I think maybe if my opinion was solicited early on, I had reservations about a Chicago firm directing this St. Louis study. And then Mr. Nelson brought up the community outreach, and I wonder if there's any way to set any targets within, this is all very fine on the backside of this staff report, but I find it to be very general in nature. And I believe that the city of Maryland Heights is currently in this, a little bit farther along in this process than we are. And they have pages and pages, when I was to their website several months ago on this issue, with regard to the things they were doing for community outreach. Is there any way to set a target goal in the contract that the community outreach will make contact with X percent of residents? I know that the last census said we had 50 residents. I think the voting records were some 5,000 registered voters. Is there a way to take what could be, and I don't want to use the term pie in the sky, but unspecific, and put specifics into what may be as much poetry or art as it is actual mechanics with regard to this issue, and guarantees that the context, the community outreach that is made is across city, across all 4 wards, that we have a truly representative notion of what the people want. Thank you.
Those are good thoughts. Mr. Wise, were those points addressed at all in the proposal? It sounds like House Hill Levine takes those into account, takes that aspect of the plan very seriously.
I think absolutely. I think they are passionate about public engagement. I don't know if I've ever seen a contract that defines, I can look into it, but I'll let you know what I find.
Well, I'll tell you what, I mean, the commission's going to be involved at each step of this process. And if we don't feel as if they're engaging the public satisfactorily, we're going to let them know. And we're going to ensure that public access and that public engagement does take place. So that's correct, right, Mr. Wise? We're going to be involved
That's correct.
constantly throughout this process.
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Member.
Also, I think last time they did it in 2006, I don't think we had any type of a website or that sort of thing that's now in place. There's all sorts of different things that people are more engaged than they ever were in 2006. So I think we always have some things in place that are going to be helpful, and then just having the plan on the line or whatever, that you can go and look at it and see where they're at and that sort of thing. So I think that's going to be a long way in having people be involved to start with.
Ms. Hanson.
Thank you. And I think to piggyback on that, if I recall correctly, when they did the first segment or first portion of this, they had a number of meetings for residents, correct? Like coffee or donuts, or am I just making that up?
They had several kind of workshop type things. The attendance was not fantastic at
All right.
those.
Do they have any thoughts about how to pump up attendance if they were to come back for this portion?
They do. I think a lot of it is, you know, one of the comments they made is, quite frankly, that, you know, they issue a challenge to this commission and say, when you all need to come to this workshop, and each of you bring 3 to 5 people. And, if each person on this board brought 3 to 5 people, and, we'd have at least, 30 or 40 people at that meeting, plus whoever, then you reach out to the school district and try to tap into the PTO or to other organizations, the library, and get them involved, and then get their membership to come in as well. And those numbers grow fairly quickly from there.
Thank you.
Anyone else from the audience? Yes, please step forward, sir. To remind the audience, they're limited to 3 minutes, 3 minutes only.
I can't say hello in 3 minutes. You already know that. John Gepper, presently homeless. As chairman of P&Z, the whole public involvement thing, it really is, it's critical, it's desirable, but in all of the plans that the city has been through, in fact, in the 2006, it was an organization by the name of Vector Communications that was a part of the team that was there, and their entire role was to run the community involvement process. And as I recall, they had a very, very strong resume in that kind of communication, that kind of meeting organization, and that sort of thing. But every single one of these plans that were done, it's always been disappointed that the community input was not what we hoped for. You walk away after a period of time and you start to think to yourself, okay, people are happy, they're just not getting off their sofa. Maybe that's an answer to make us feel good, but the community input has never lived up to what we would like to have seen. Just a dose of reality.
Thank you, Mr. Geppert.
So can I ask him a question?
Ms. Smith?
So when you say that, because I actually participated in those workshops, and
Yeah,
so
I-
they
yeah,
were
yeah, you did.
actually
You
very
did.
well attended, not very well, that they were well attended compared to some of the community engagement things I've seen since.
It
So
just
what was
didn't-
your expectation from that perspective when you were on it?
Karen, that was 8 years ago, 9 years ago. I
Yeah.
really don't remember expectations,
Right, okay.
and we sort of put the responsibility into Vector's,
Right,
court.
right, uh-huh.
And I don't remember discussions of objectives. I remember discussions at meetings going, really wish there would have been some more participation from the community.
Okay.
And it just didn't, it was like how to get more.
I mean, it seemed like there was more when we did the Vector, when Vector was involved than when, I'm not going to get their name right, but Halcyon Levine, the community outreach that they did, went to one of those sessions, and they didn't have very good attendance. But at the other one, at the one, the Vector Communication, I remember we had enough that we broke into like workout groups and did some different charting on flip charts, and so.
Yeah, and as I recall, as we go through as Justin spoke to, a 9-month, 12-month process, then that community commitment to involvement,
Does-
we also saw
Yeah, that-
kind of
yeah,
take a
that
little
does
bit of a
happen.
declining process. So that's just kind of the history
Thank
that
you.
we've seen. And it's a wonderful goal, and I think you push your professionals to get as many people here. In my experience or memory with Vector, they did a very good job of putting the message out, but you can't necessarily make the horse drink when you get it to the water. So, anyway, just sharing that.
Thank you, Mr. Geppert. Anyone else from the audience? Any further comments from commissioners? Seeing none, the chair will entertain a motion. Ms. Bilderbeck?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we recommend to the Board of Aldermen, consistent with staff's recommendation for Housel Levine and Associates to be selected for this project as outlined.
Second.
Motion
You
is
need to-
second.
You need to make note about the alternate contract of full amount, 130,000.
Sure, for
I
the full amount
yeah.
that's here with the alternate, the $130,000.
Second.
Motion is second. Any further discussion? Roll call, please.
John Ritter. Yes. Rebecca Jacobs.
Yes.
Clint Lewis.
Yes.
John Nuremberg is yes. Sarah Bilderbach.
Yes.
David Dimmitt.
Yes.
Jennifer Hansen.
Yes.
Karen Smith.
Yes.
Hart Nelson.
Yes.
Motion passes, Mr. Chairman.
Very good. Thank you for the good debate, Commission. We have no new business. Automatic report. I see Mr. Plufka. No report. City planners report.
Just a quick update on the bedroom store. They have officially withdrawn their application at this point, and they canceled their contract on the property. So they will not be coming back, at least without a new contract.
Are you still in contact with them, Mr. Wise?
Occasionally.
No need for a site plan review subcommittee. Rationale, Mr. Wise, you can handle. You heard many of the debate points that were made tonight, in particular, the strong desire of this commission to stress public engagement. Other business, I appreciate Alderman Plufka being here, Ms. Charbonneau, but I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize John Geppert, the former chair of the commission, man whose shoes I try to fill. So, Mr. Geppert, welcome back to Brentwood.
Fortunately for you, it's only for a short period.
We're glad to have you. Mr. Nurnberger?
I was just going to say, we probably should have let Hart Nelson introduce himself on the camera. He was not there in the last meeting, so I thought that would be probably kind of appropriate.
Excellent point. Camera right. Mr. Nelson, you going to take 30 seconds to introduce yourself?
Great. Well, thanks for being here. I apologize I wasn't able to make our first meeting. I was probably driving to Montreal from New York when my flight was canceled at that time. I am on Sussex in York Village. I've been here for a couple years. Wife with 3 little boys, 2 of whom are at McGrath and 1 of whom I hope to get at McGrath soon, so I get a little bit of a pay raise, but he's at BEC right now. Looking forward to doing the work. My day job is I'm the Director of Policy for the St. Louis Regional Chamber, so I get to do some of this, bounce around quite a bit. I'm very glad to be focused in my own neighborhood and where I live. So thank you very much for having
Great.
me.
You'll be a great asset to the commission. We're glad to have you. Any other business? Entertain a motion to adjourn. Ms. Bilderback,
So moved.
is there a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? All right, we stand adjourned.